So our last panel this morning is going to be moderated by Toshiko Mori, the Robert P. Hubbard Professor in the Practice of Architecture at the Graduate School of Design. The panel's title, Practical Grace, Designers Face the Future, made me wonder whether this is about practical grace law facing the future as the Department of Architecture's new program director. But we know instead that although there surely is a future of architecture, we need to know much more about the role of designers and architects in that future, a distinction to be drawn if we, as professions, seek to lead in questions. So let me turn it over to moderator Toshiko Mori.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to this very exciting days of Grounded Visionary Campaign. This panel is very informal. I gave them questions. I told them, don't prepare anything. You have to be spontaneous, so it's conversational. And a rule of our panel is that you can react to each other, you can question each other. So I think it's a rare occasion to hear from those distinguished individuals on this panel. Now, role of designers and a practice has been evolving. As Lars Lira mentioned in the first panel, that Pandora's box of enormous complexity has opened up. And there's a drastic sea change into what we do as architects, planners, landscape architects, designers. And as Alex also mentioned in the last panel, that we as architects and also landscape architects become more aware of a planning process. And also the planners, I think we talked about, Martha talked about 90% diplomacy, involvement in government, and working with different constituents. That type of role is quite new. And as we can observe from our practices, that sometimes we become psychologists to our clients, private house clients, they become dependent on us, the children, the grandparents, everything. We become analysts. We become advocates for communities, and then we become advisors, and we get to ask many different questions we may not have predicted as students here. So in a sense, it's actually a very, very interesting time for us. And because of those different roles we might be asked to play, which I would say is an opportunity. Instead of having the roles taken over by cell phone, I think we see clues of our roles expanding, increasing in our societies. In fact, we deal with a leadership of society, head of states and CEOs, to mothers in underserved communities. We deal with, as professionals, and as we teach students, with same degree of respect and dignity. So in a sense that our work has expanded into, and also encompass different spectrum, broader spectrum of economic, social, cultural landscape than we probably have known years ago, even 5 years ago. And also in terms of time and location, we're working with many different communities, immediate communities in Cambridge, to cities in the United States, to all over the world, to again, remote communities in the different parts of the world. In terms of time, as mentioned before in the first panel, that immediate solution we are asked to do for helping disaster relief, and some temporary solutions, and also permanent acts that we are supposed to propose. It also depends on people are dealing with immediate, tragic, and scary crisis, but we also have to be in the role to advise people about the future, longer-term future for post-crisis conditions and so forth. So we live in these complex societies. So it's I think it's best thing is to introduce the panel from. We are lined up in alphabetical order, from because that will really show us diverse type of practice, and then what I like to do is to proceed to propose questions. Teran Evans, over there, he is a founding partner of BIGAT, formerly Diascuri at Design, with his twin brother Teran Evans over there. They're always together. based in Brooklyn. Its consultancy offering is multiple media and branding, product design, and also brand strategic management. He's been teaching, and they've been teaching a course on product design, and currently this semester, paper for plastic, reinventing a shelf life in the supermarket. So that's Teran here. And next to you is Ginny Yang, is a founding principal Studio Yang. It's a collective of architects and designers based in Chicago, winner of MacArthur Fellow and of National Design Award. And her firm aims to strengthen the synergy between urban and natural systems. And her project has transformational impact and potential in urban communities and rural communities and natural settings throughout. And she has actually invented many of her practices through her rigorous research processes throughout. We have Eric Howeler next, and he's our assistant professor here, and also a partner of Howeler Yoon Architecture. It's based in Cambridge on multidisciplinary practices working between architecture, public space, and media. And he's a winner of 2012 OD Urban Future Award, a proposal for Bosworth 2030 comprehensive proposal for the future of urban mobility. He teaches core design studios and also constructive systems at the GSD. We have Grace La here. As Jerold mentioned, she's our director of Master of Architecture programs here at the GSD, is a founding principal of La Darman Architects. The firm is noted for works that expands the architecture capacity for interdisciplinary, expanding into planning and landscape in sometimes very difficult and challenging circumstances. And they are winner of a Brunner Silver Award for Urban Excellence, and also a winner of a Rice Design Alliance Prize, first U.S. practice to be awarded that prize here. She teaches second semester core and currently teaches Aperture and Beyond a semester. Michael Murphy is a founding principal of Mass Design Group. It's a social agency based in Boston, Massachusetts. And they engage and offer exceptional value of design to underserved communities throughout the world. And his projects have been published in many, many places, most recently the winner of Zumtobel Group Award. And he's been a campaign called Beyond Building, something very interesting about this. And his operation is actually non-profit, so it's a very different practice than others. Kate Orff, representing landscape discipline, is founder of Scape, landscape architecture and urban design, a studio based in New York City. She is an associate professor at the Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture. And working with global issues such as climate change and rising tide, she comes up with the solutions that connects communities to its immediate solutions. So in the first panel, we were talking about how do you connect larger global issues to small issues from Rahul Mehta and Jorge Silvetti. Kate is the one who's practicing it through the landscape discipline here. And last but not the least, Krzysztof here, Wodiczko, is an artist, and he's been with us, a professor in residence of art, design a public domain here at the GSD. His work deals with ephemerals, ethereals, temporary conditions, and also memories. He has had projections in global cities in more than 80 locations, works with nomadic conditions and difficult political circumstances. And he is teaching now a studio called Architecture of Cultural Prosthetics, Tools for Communication, Expression in the Public Space. So the questions I pose to everybody, it's actually, I will just go through idea of positioning design, idea of strategy of design, And focus of design, is it focus or divergent? And idea of empowerment, value of design, paradigm shift, and role of designers in mode of practice, and so forth. So I think the first question I'd like to work is Jerold, since you suggested I ask my practical Grace of Grace Ladd. She's sitting right in the center. Is there a new role for designers emerging as you observe through your practice? And then since you have evolved from college student here and students here in practice in different parts of states in the world, can you address that?
Sure, thank you, Toshiko. I didn't know I was going first. Thought we would go in alphabetical order. Okay, I probably should start by saying that our practice was cast in the crucible of the Rust Belt of the Midwest. And so that typifies a very kind of typical American city with problems that are actually quite, that you find actually globally. And that is, how does one recast or retool the post-industrial city? It presents a number of different kinds of problems, I think, for architects. And in our practice, one of the first ways in which we began to think about how we might engage this question is through infrastructure. So our practice currently is involved in a lot of civic projects and buildings, but also bridges. And this has been a new sort of territory for us. We are not trained as engineers, and also actually contractually, architects are not allowed to hold bridge contracts in many of the states in the United States. So this is a kind of new territory in a sense, which requires let's say a different kind of set of collaborative processes to become realized. But I would say that for our practice, I think a critical aspect of this kind of emerging role is to work within our brethren discipline of, for example, civil engineering. If I had to do it again, I would actually get a degree in civil engineering, because I think that this is an incredible potential for us. Bridges and highways, they produce very interesting underutilized territories that our practice has been focusing on.
Well, I think that leads naturally to Kate Orff, because your practice does involve infrastructure. And if Antoine Picon would say it, the discipline of landscape in France used to be within the civil engineering realm. So your work bridges a lot in terms of gap or connectivity between infrastructure and natural landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so in the intro, you talked a little bit about climate change, and I think that's sort of how, even springing from the GSD environment to 1997, when I had this kind of amazing chance to work with teachers like Anita Beres-Beta and then Rem in the project on the city. And I think it was really exciting because it was really a shifting moment when we were kind of transitioning from thinking about landscape architecture as, professional practice that you must, technically execute and have a strong position about building sites in the world and building them well and getting them in magazines, to an extra version of landscape and towards looking outwards and kind of reconceptualizing many of the sort of underthought territories as landscape. And so anyway, I just say that in my own practice, the focus on climate change has really focused on a shift to thinking about landscape as infrastructure, as you say, and kind of almost accepting a sort of a blind spot towards the land and looking at water and looking at other zones of other territories of operating that and strangely the training of a landscape architect in that time has been very useful to try to address. So I think it's exciting to be able to kind of, I think infrastructure is a very helpful tool to be, the grounded visionary. I think it's helpful because you need to think across systems and you need to be connective, and visionary. At the same time, there's a sort of a plan and a section and a site. And so I feel like that's a helpful rubric to move forward.
So I think question now is to Ginny Yang. You seem to do it on a research based, and idea is how do you do it, and also is it empowering? We talked about last couple of sessions about the role and positioning of designers. Does your research help you with engaging with diverse bodies and sectors and power structure? It's a complex question.
Yeah, I think the research, I have to go back also and talk about time at the GSD a little bit, because that's really where the research methodology was started for me in doing a thesis prep and then trying to focus on questions as opposed to merely the project itself, and so trying to identify those questions that could keep you sustained through different types of projects and different typologies, that's still very valuable today. So oftentimes with our research, trying to develop questions about issues, and then we look for projects that will be able to help answer that in a certain way. So for example, we were interested in, again, in being the Midwest, the post-industrial river in Chicago, and exploring that with partners, because it's impossible to do that kind of research on your own, but with partners, and having that live independently, and then looking for projects where that some of the results can be tested through those architectures. So I don't feel like giving up on building architecture. In fact, it's one of the most satisfying parts about practice. But it is a tool. The projects, I see the projects as a tool to explore further these larger questions.
Thank you. And also in terms of your practice, do you think, because you work in many different scales, does your method change?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think one thing that would be incredible to solve, because we've been talking about these different scales, is how something on a material level, and that really even microscopic scale materials that we all work with, connects to the bigger environmental challenges. And so I think for each project, a big part of the design is designing the team. I've collaborated with Kate on a number of projects where it seemed like her expertise and others could come together to address the appropriate scale for that project. But I do think that's one thing architects are very good at, is kind of creating that team that's specific to the project. And that's what helps you adjust to the different scales and the different issues that will be coming up.
So Eric, a question for you is, you have also a diverse practice, and I think Jeannie's point about collaboration, and then also you work in architecture and media and landscape urbanization and also messaging and so forth. So how do you work collaboratively, and how do you make different type of teams?
So listening this morning to some of the discussion, I was struck by how we're sort of placing designers in the context of much bigger issues. You know, sitting here thinking about global urbanization, extreme urbanization. I do think we're teaching designers in the school in the context of these bigger ideas that can't be solved by any one discipline. You know, these problems are bigger and broader and deeper than any one discipline. So that's something pretty special as architects, training architects to work in that context, recognizing expertise and when you need to go beyond your discipline. I think in our young practice, we've sort of trespassed into other practices, I think sometimes very productively, working with landscape architects, sometimes making stuff up as we go, working on lighting, working on interactivity, but also having the privilege to do research. I think that's one of the things we have as somewhat academic practices. We have the time to sort of take on issues that we find interesting. And a few years ago, we looked out the window and saw the Big Dig sort of coming to completion and thought, that's interesting. How did that happen? And so we started asking our questions, wrote a Graham Foundation grant, did a book on the Big Dig that led to an interest in transport infrastructure and mobility, and that somehow turned into a project for Audi in the Urban Futures Award. So I think finding curiosities that we have as designers beyond our own discipline. I think that's one of the things we can cultivate here, and finding how we can contribute, whether it's through a team effort or through sort of promiscuous sort of disciplinary collaborations that I think the GSD thrives on. So I think that's how we've been trying to do it as a young practice, but certainly not doing it on our own, reaching out to others to help us do that.
So changing gear a little bit about value of design, there's two parts to it. One is how is our work valued, meaning are we getting paid enough? Resounding answer is no, of course not. But how do we change it? And then also how to enlighten people about value of design. I think we do design very quietly. It does add value, but somehow it's not articulated. So from, I think, Teran, do you want to start that question, value of design, what you think we offer, and how we should be getting paid more?
Well, I think absolutely we should be paid more. I guess I like nice things, so more money is always great. But I think, I think in seriousness, it also starts with us kind of revisiting the relationship that we traditionally have with clients. I've found usually clients will come to us as architects on the back end of the process. In other words, you have sort of a bunch of smart people who have sat at a table and they've devised a strategy. And then at the point when that strategy has been devised, they come to the architect to design what that's going to look like. And that's the role that we've always traditionally assumed is designing the skin of it, designing what that strategy becomes. And I think that we, because of the diverse skill set that we have, can have a seat at that table at the very inception of strategy. We can be there influencing, decisions that are made, in that we can help develop strategy that then begins to be implemented. And so I think when we take on that more powerful role, then we have the right to request more money for those things. And I think that, that is the power that we have, in the way that we are educated as architects. And this is something when I was a student that, of all people, actually, Ram Koolhaas kind of drilled into me. And I guess I was sort of indoctrinated early on. He grabbed me and my brother when we were here as students and kind of dragged us all over China with him. And one of the things he said to me was that, I'm so surprised that you come to the GSD and you're exposed to so many ways of thinking and working, and yet when you all leave this place, you all decide to do the same thing, which is kill each other to put buildings up all over the world. And I was like, kind of like, wow, why are you of all people saying that? But, at the same time, it really did, it gave me pause. And so I honestly believe, just in the experiences that I've had, that, our future in this profession is not one that lies in brick and mortar, but it's one that lies in the designing of systems, and also in the designing of strategy.
Okay. Now, I'd like to ask Michael Murphy. It's a different value design that he offers to social agency to underserved communities, and he runs a nonprofit. So I'd like to ask you about the value of design, how you offer it, and how you operate nonprofit, because that's a new model for a lot of us.
Yeah, thanks, Toshiko. I often tell other architects that we have a nonprofit architecture firm, and they respond, well, so do we. In reality, what we're talking about is, and I think what many the panelists are talking about, are how can we revalue both the marketplace of architecture, but also how do we unlock untapped marketplaces, which haven't before been the kind of purview of architects. So it'd be civil engineering or strategy, software development, or in our case, healthcare. We encountered a doctor, and while I was a student here, my first year, Dr. Paul Farmer, and he was talking about all the buildings that they're building across the world, in Africa, in Latin America. And when I asked him afterwards who the architects he worked with, he of course said, architects, why would I ever use an architect? Or no architects have come to us to see how they can be helpful, was really what he was sort of a call to action. And that kind of was a stark reminder that we value our own profession, but many others don't value what we do. And we had to kind of prove value for it to be not only paid for in a marketplace, but to show that we as architects can provide solutions and resources to not just other disciplines like healthcare or the development space, but also communities that are largely underserved. And so in doing that work, we see every day the opportunities to potentially unlock other markets, other sources of revenue, other sources of funding that can actually expand the role of architecture into a kind of, for all architects, not just for architects working in a particular space. And so as a nonprofit, I would just say, I think the nonprofit acts as a kind of symbiotic relationship to the for-profit sector. They work together to unlock markets in particular, and they hold a fiduciary responsibility to the public. And so they're kind of carving out new space that then will be filled in by the marketplace itself. So we propose that the nonprofit architecture firm is just one of many typologies that can help expand both the relevance but also the marketplace of architecture itself.
So talking about value of design, Krzysztof deals with value of design in a very different way. Some statistics show that 80% of the work, future work, especially for architects, are dealing with existing conditions. Adaptive reuse is a practical terms, but his work often deals with physical buildings which exist and extend its life by intervening in an ephemeral, ethereal way. And I have Krzysztof here as a poetic grace for this panel. And I like from your perspective, value of arts and design in our environment and probably the power of it, especially because your work is often triggered controversy, political, positive, oftentimes. You suffered from it. Would you like to address that issue of a value?
Well, I think that there was a statement here made that planning precedes architecture or building in the previous conversation here. But one could say maybe temporary art, interventional art, follows buildings and architecture. That may be perhaps too simple, because then there was a call that perhaps we should learn from planners as architects, or the opposite true as well. So artists should learn from both, and everybody should learn from art, because the world is too complex to work alone. So we do need to work together. So I guess I'm very glad to be here in this not to be alone, in yes, in facing the issue, not only how to make new buildings, however great they are and fantastic and even challenging, but also how to live with them afterwards in a creative, sensitive, communicative, and expressive way. So we can then also bring new meaning to them and also project new meaning on them. And how to also live with monuments, with the ghosts of the past, not to be trapped by them, or as Churchill said, that buildings make us, we make building. But also Bertolt Brecht said that cities are allowed to change, but we are not, in his poems about the city. So how it is that we can change ourselves and our minds and our relations, and how to create discourse that is really truly agonistic, dynamic, so we will not miss important things to communicate and express with each other in already built cities and environment. And for this, I think we must shift to different modes of design, not only making buildings. So I think that artists and designers must then provoke people to speak to each other and back to the buildings. But also we should design all sorts of equipment, implements, instruments, temporary structures, some supplemental institutions and structures to existing buildings and structures. So arm ourselves to do exactly what I said, just to actually create the public space that is worth living, and not only is about those who were there before, but also for our future. So, of course, students with whom I work and with the help of Annie Liu, who is also a graduate of GSD, who is joining us as a faculty. We are actually trying to create conditions for architecture students to do exactly that, to be architects, and at the same time see the future of architectural profession as much expanded to actually embrace those various requests that comes with public space.
That's a wonderful statement. Thank you, Krzysztof. And I think there's a white elephant in the room is idea of a star architects versus non-star architects. That's been controversy over it. But also it's really a question of, is design more esoteric and specialized profession in architecture and landscape, or is it forming more social connected fabric? And as you can see from the spectrum of panelists, everybody has a different opinion. Some people in a borderline between. So is there a distinction? Can you start from Teran? Like, what do you think of this esoteric, specialized role of designers as icon architecture versus socially connected, more of an invisible value, like for your strategy versus systems? That's so very short answers to all from.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go on record as saying that I believe that the era of the star architect has ended, and I think it has ended because the questions that have been asked and the solutions that are being demanded of clients by clients are much more complex. I would say more complex now than they have ever been, in that it demands this cross-collaborative environment in order to adequately address those issues. So I do not believe that one person alone, this one sort of entity, can address those issues. So that I think we have to begin to there's a collaboration that begins to happen. I think we've all, to a certain degree, kind of alluded to it and talking about collaborations with different professions. And I've always said it's the absolute benefit of even the way that the school is organized is that we all sit under one roof in this building, and you have all of the disciplines here. And I think it becomes a kind of a representation of what will be required to be successful when you move beyond these doors.
Ginny?
I was agreeing with what you say about that the collaboration is there, and it takes many members of a team to make a successful outcome. But I see the phenomena, I guess, of the star architect is not invented by us. I mean, it's really something that is foisted upon us by a marketplace that is trying to use architects to create more value for their projects. And so I think the resistance that we can offer to that is really just to always give voice to the team members that are part of the architects are going to be asked to speak out about projects, and very large projects that involve a lot of financial investment, but to constantly remind the public that it is a multifaceted profession, and that it does take many different people, and looking for those opportunities to bring that up is really important, I think. I don't think we can say that it's over. It's going to be done, so that projects gain more value, especially in development. Developers use that quite a lot. So it's really, we need to get a better handle on, I think it's a good question, we need to get a better handle on how we respond to that, and whether we think it's an entirely negative thing, or if it can be used, for a greater good.
Very quickly, Eric, yes, no, or maybe?
The question
Quick
was...
sentence, why?
Okay, so the question was, is architecture more esoteric or more specialized? Or
No,
the star
esoteric,
architect?
specialized, or less visible but more connective as a social agency. Like what Teran is saying is it's more strategy and system-oriented than actual object-oriented.
I mean, I think architects make objects and cities that have incredible power as images and brands and real estate models. That's not going to go away, and so the star architect is part of that phenomena. I was going to say something about esoteric and specialization. I mean, we are defiantly unspecialized, and that's what allows us to take on work in so many different areas, and that's what makes our work super exciting. That's why we do it every day, and that's why we have the privilege of being here to teach students, is because our interests are so non-specialized. I think that's what makes us effective when we work in different disciplines on bigger issues like mobility or healthcare. I mean, it's fascinating to hear the stories around the table here. So I would say defiantly not specialized. I think that's where our strength comes from. Yeah.
Great answer. Okay, great.
So like Eric, I would say that quite broad in the sense that at least our practice has required huge knowledge bases across many, many different fields. But to connect it back to the question of star architect or not, one of the things that we've noticed is that as the reputation of our practice expands and as we perhaps become more well known as a practice, one of the strange ironies of that is that there's an assumption that that the star architect is also elitist and anti-public, so while I believe that it's a kind of mechanism that is basically outside of my control and it is imposed on me by essentially media, it does actually quite a lot of damage to my mission and some of the areas in which I'm actively trying to engage, which have to do with public space, and specifically publicly owned public space, so not privatized public space, as we were talking about in the other panel. So I find that to be an interesting new friction and rub in the everyday, day-to-day processes of our practice.
Okay, Michael.
I presume most
good at one-liners.
Am I one-liner? Okay, I'll have three lines. I think most of us would presume we would want to move away from the era of the star architect or the commodification of the architect, but that also requires us to move away from the building as a commodity itself. So I think one of the shifts that we're seeing, and I think I would advocate for here at this institution, is that we must be asking not what a building is, but what a building does. And those sorts of processual questions will help us get there. And I think the third point I would say is if we continue to create a binary between, let's say, the esoteric or the capital A architect and the hyphenated architect, the social architect, the public architect, the hybridized architect, whatever, it's a very dangerous effort to kind of separate what ultimately could be a broader relevance to our discipline and open up new markets if it all is all under the umbrella of architecture.
Okay. I guess as the landscape architect up here, I would say that I see, it's really interesting in this conference, this notion of themes that are emerging about coordination, interdisciplinarity. So for me, I see this huge undefined role, something that Harvard can be training for, which is the notion of the convener, right? Who convenes these conversations? Who's leading the dialogue? Who's sort of crafting those? So I think in that way, maybe there is a shift from the star architect to the sort of star coordinator or vision, person who is out there and kind of shaping and convening the conversations that need to be had. And I think that is in the landscape of in the DNA of the landscape architect's way of thinking. So I would put in a plug for landscape architects to lead that conversation.
Yes. That's why she's on the panel with us. Krzysztof, any thoughts? Well, you're an artist, except
Okay, so I should have some wishes towards the field of art.
Yes.
Yeah, that actually moves closer to design. Because it has been a tradition that when it comes to serious visions and projects, and utopias as well in the modernist tradition, artists and designers work together. They form avant-garde groups. So, of course, we went through this period of deconstruction, so it's kind of a little contradiction, constructing something, being deconstructive. or actually quite interesting contradiction, maybe complexity. But I think after a period of deconstruction, some artists, and I am the one who's calling my colleagues to join me in this direction, we have to move into new construction after a period, without stopping being deconstructive, of course. And in this moment, we definitely have to become designers, or at least work with designers. So as I repeat again, the world again is too complex to work alone. And I think this is something that field of art has to acknowledge one more time.
Great. We like to move on to a question and answer. I'm sure you have a lot of questions here, I hope, because we have so many interesting people who are here with us. Any questions here? Yes, Mark. Could you give him a microphone? It's Mark Kushner, who's going to be moderating our sessions later today, is a founder of Architizer. Was there somebody else in front of you? No.
I don't want to cut.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I'll try to make my question short.
Can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Paul Yeager. I'm an alumnus of the school in architecture. So although I'm retired, I still call myself an architect. I'm so glad that you brought up the question of how we can add value to the public perception of our profession or our professions as designers. When I was considering going into architecture as a young guy, my father, who was a physician, said to me, "You know, Paul, you'll never be rich as an architect." And I said, "I know that, Dad, but I want to be an architect, and it doesn't matter to me that I won't be rich." Well, as a graduate architect or as a retired architect, it does matter to me. And I suspect that there are many in this room to whom it also matters. I want to pose a challenge or a rather a pessimistic note here, pessimistic thought, and see what people's reactions are. And that is that when people approach a physician or approach an attorney, they do so because they're scared. They're scared because they're ill. They're scared because they're facing death, possibly, or because they may be facing litigation, or they may be facing the loss of a large sum of money. And so they go to these professions, and the public values these professions. They're pedestalized. Architects, when people approach us, are not faced with someone who's concerned to the same degree and who's scared. And that, I think, is at the heart of the matter. I would pose the question, how can we get people scared enough to come to us?
I have to say Michael Murphy might have some answer because he's dealing with a life and death situation in some communities, literally.
Yeah, I think
his work deals with healthcare, and saving lives is one of the issues that.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, we often pose, it's not what's the cost of architecture we have to ask, it's what's the cost of not having architecture. So if we as a discipline can answer that question, what is the cost of not using our expertise and our services, we've come a long way into revaluing and creating a societal demand for architecture to improve the lives of inhabitants of all places. And we saw that directly because hospitals weren't being designed, especially across emerging economies. And as we see in this country too, people are going into hospitals to get better and they're coming out much sicker. And there's spatial dimensions for that. And there's ways in which architects can solve those problems. And we saw direct outcomes where design interventions actually can help heal and improve lives. And if we start to track, I mean, many of you, I'm sure in all of your practices have seen impacts, positive impacts from your work on people's lives. If we start to track those, we start to see and show and articulate behavior change, we start to articulate impacts of our work on lives of people, we start to recreate a societal demand for our work, and I think start to articulate that there are markets out there that haven't paid or haven't valued what we do and need to open up those markets, and so that we create this bigger and stronger demand. And I think that's the way in which we have to move. or else we're going to continue to be considered a luxury commodity and irrelevant.
Is that a speech that you can give to a prospective client?
We give that. I tell prospective clients that all the time.
Yes, I think I like Krzysztof to respond because his work scares a lot of people.
Perhaps it should, because I'm considering memorials, memory, our life with them, especially war memorials. If we don't establish critical discourse with them, as they, of course, they do acknowledge the sacrifice of people who innocent people who lost their lives, but also they seem to promote certain ideas in the process. So there's a mixture of graveyards and ideological war machines that actually perpetuate certain notions of sacrifice and certain notions of kind of sacred duty to actually join the war. We are now in time of commemorating First World War, including one of the battles in which almost 1 million people died. So the question is how, if we didn't establish new relation with those memorials, what our future will be. We'll be building more memorials, or what to do with memorials so there will be no more of them. So this is something that is the issue of design, but also, of course, cultural work, all of the work of those who preserve monuments in terms of on urban scale. So I'm thinking that it's a frightening thing to imagine that we passively continue our life with those ghosts of the past.
Okay, I think Mark, there's 3 people, right? Mark, Charlotte, Fashid. Yes, Mark?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I was really interested in this conversation, the beginning of the conversation, how do we make more money? How do we have more power? And then we ended on Starchitects and this kind of hemming and hawing about whether it's good or not. And I look at this beautiful panel, beautiful architects, all in black, up against this black background with red lines. And I think, man, this is such an incredibly strong brand that we have. And isn't Starchitects just the tip of the iceberg of what we can do with our brand to get more power and to get more money? And so my question is, what am I missing? Shouldn't we all want to be Starchitects and make that pedestal like the last question just asked? What am I not getting? Why is this a curse word?
Anyone wants
Thank
to
you.
respond? Yeah? Jeannie?
Well, when I was just thinking about the title of our conference as well, the Grounded Visionaries. When I was growing up, grounded meant you couldn't go outside of home. You were grounded. But I think, as a grown-up, it really just means that your plane's not going to take off, right? You're a grounded visionary. But I think it gets back to the title and thinking about grounded more as people who want to have an impact on the society and their world and people's lives. And I don't think everyone wants to. The problem with the Starchitect thing, there's too few of them, and it is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the talent that's lies within architecture and landscape architecture and urban design, but it's a system that it's too much about the commodity for someone else, and it doesn't do us any good to have that bit of few people called out like that. We have to find a better way to get the message across and the brand across of the intelligence that is in the design world and the graduates of the GSD and other schools of architecture. I read somewhere that like 40% of the people in Italy actually study architecture as an undergrad. Of course, 40% of the population are not architects, but there is something to that in that there is an understanding that's a kind of a liberal arts understanding of the built environment that is really important toward society. And so I don't have an answer, but I don't think that the StarkTech system is really doing us a lot of good. It is, I think, in general, the awareness of design has grown, and that is doing us good. I think the things that you guys are doing, the things that, the amount of publications that are available, the online space is all doing a lot of good. And it's just a problem when it just gets narrowed down to this very few.
I think we move on to the next question. Is that Charlotte?
Yes. Hi,
Kayden.
thanks for the great panel. You guys are all talking about the architect as having this sort of broad set of expertise. You talked about the role as a convener. And one of the cool things for me about architecture was that I got to decide to come into this field when I was 22 after having already studied something else. So I'm curious how many of you up there have degrees in other things that then led you to architecture. That said, it also takes a long time to become an architect, and that's time when we're not making money. And so I'm wondering, and this is also sort of a US-centric view, the US is one of the few places where you can take this sort of prolonged route to becoming an architect. So I'm wondering if you think there's value in that we're actually gaining as a profession because we have these people who have taken many, many years to get to the point where they can be called an architect. What you see in that as a practice, whether it's valuable or not.
Anyone?
Well, I'll start. I studied architecture as an undergraduate student before coming to the GSD, but at the same time, I was also, I minored in musical performance, so I earned another degree in musical performance and theory. I played the bassoon and the saxophone and piano and a bunch of different things. So, I brought those sensibilities to my profession, to my practice now, and I think it's part of the reason that our skill set as a group is so diverse, because more instances than not, we're bringing so many other experiences to the profession. And so, I think a lot of times people will say, you've heard the expression that human beings only use 10% of their brains. And I think once we leave this place, we have to avoid the risk of only using 10% of our skill set. And that, as a large body, we bring so much to the table, then it's what allows us to be involved in so many different parts of the process and to be involved in so many, different entities. Because we bring that diversity and it's something that I think it should be encouraged. It's something that I applaud, and I think it's something that separates us from other professions.
Thank you.
Can I just?
You want to do quickly?
Yeah, just quick. I studied English literature in undergraduate, and I decided to choose a graduate degree in a discipline that was less employable than English literature, which is how I chose architecture. But I think your question, Charlie, is really a structural one. How do we configure new policies and talk to the AIA and new guidelines to make architecture a more easily attainable or achievable discipline and profession? And I think that's something that we do need to look at that aligns with the problems of student debt, that aligns with the issues around a barrier to entry, that aligns with the issues around the long pathway to creating one's own firm. I think there's ways in which we as a discipline can configure new policies to reduce debt, allow for new opportunities to start our entrepreneurial and businesses, as well as push the AIA to help reduce the barrier to entry for us as architects. So I would advocate for that as a young architect yourself.
Thank you. And one last question. Is that Wendy?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Toshi.
Please introduce yourself.
One thing, Wendy Evans-Joseph, alumni, and one thing linking back actually to something that happened in the previous panel, when Moshe was talking, design excellence programs, I think, are something that could be entered into this conversation. That was a very big shift when design excellence started coming in and the public realm started to embrace architects as having both ideas about design and what things look like, but also the way they work, that architecture and design is also part of pragmatic business. And I know, Kate, you're part of that in New York City, and of course the Bloomberg administration was an enormous boon for architects and also for the city itself. For the first time, public parks became beautiful, and they became a different type of park than people had inhabited before. And so I think that this is an area that we should all support as much as we can, and sort of as a political action, try to get our candidates and our people who are making decisions about the country as a whole to sort of embrace architecture. So.
Okay, it's a statement.
It's a
No,
statement,
I mean,
but
I
also
can-
a question. I think,
Yeah,
Kate,
yeah.
you could pick up on this because
Yeah,
we've
okay.
talked about it
Great,
in the
great.
past.
No,
Try
I,
to get forward.
I think I want to pick up on the word you used, political, because that's also something that and maybe weave it back with the idea of the Starchitect, because I do see in this panel in particular kind of a shift, right, from the sort of architecture as a commodity or to something that is more like a political act, and a design, the act of design as being inherently a challenge to existing conditions. And so I think that can happen in many different ways. Design excellence being one of them. But anyway, I'm excited also to see that the notion of combining, I think, is so important. Like all these panelists are combining different things, whether it's public health and architecture or art and architecture. I think that is that capacity to sort of imaginatively kind of be able to combine, to this woman's question here about what is a background. I think it's really like, what is your design expertise and what is your non-design expertise, and how do you begin to sort of weave these together and combine them? Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think, Wendy, you brought up a very interesting point about activism in architecture and us being involved in politics and everything around us. So that's a very nice conclusion to this particular panel. And thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you, Toshiko.
Could the panelists just stay there for a second? Kate, could you sit down for just 1 second? Thanks. Still a student. So we've now heard, first of all, thank you, Toshiko, for that wonderful moderation of the panel. We've heard, by my count, from 21 people. And to me, I think of this morning really as a jigsaw puzzle in which all of us in the audience now, in our thoughts, at the food trucks, and beyond, when this is perhaps posted on video on our school webpage, you can really assemble a quite fascinating, it seems to me, kind of dossier on where we are. And maybe we become the Starkest School in the sense of convening together, actually, a wonderful group of people, and also thanking the 10 or so speakers from the audience who have pushed some of the panelists to answer what are difficult questions. Okay, so from the sacred to the profane, we will reconvene here at 1:45. We have lunch with food trucks outside, and as well, there are more slots for attendance here, I've been asked to say. I don't exactly know what that means, but I think it means more people can attend here. So thank you all very, very much, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon.